What is the trouble with Islam today, in your view?
In a word, Muslims. We are the trouble with Islam today.
The mullahs are all bad. Everyone thinks for themselves.
Not all bad. Come on.
A lot of them are bad.
Hyping that.
A lot of them are bad.
Don't be a typical journalist.
A lot of them are bad.
Don't do that.
A lot of them are bad. I read 2 of your books. They didn't come out very well.
Don't polarize.
A lot of them are bad.
Mehdi Hasan does not want you to see this debate. Take a look.
Welcome, Irshad, to Head to Head. Thank you very much for joining us. Let's kick off this discussion with perhaps the most important question, because a lot of people know you from your first book, which was called The Trouble with Islam Today. What is the trouble with Islam today, in your view?
In a word, Muslims. We are the trouble with Islam today. We have allowed tribal culture to colonize the faith of Islam. But the good news in saying this is that we are also the source of reform, meaning that we can literally draw inspiration from our own scripture, from the Quran, in order to reform our hearts, our spirits, and our beings. And one passage that has been profoundly inspirational for me is the one that states, believers, conduct yourselves with justice and bear true witness before God. And here is the revolutionary part: even if it be against yourselves, your parents, or your relatives. This is a call for moral courage. This is a call to stand up when others want you to sit down. And it is part of what makes Islam as a faith revolutionary in the 21st century, not just in the 7th.
It's fascinating to hear you say this, because a lot of your critics, and you have a fair few critics, especially within the Muslim community, their objection to you over the years, my understanding is that you say there's a problem with Islam, and a lot of Muslims say, and I would count myself amongst them, who say there's a problem with Muslims, certainly with many Muslims, definitely need some form of reform, change, revolution, whatever you want to call it. But Islam is the religion. Don't bring Islam into it. Where do you stand on this?
It is a problem with Muslims. However, Mehdi, let's ask ourselves, what is Islam? Islam isn't some theory. Islam is a way of life, and it is we Muslims who define what that way of life is. And so if we are stopping one another from expressing our diversity, then the message we are sending to each other, not just to the rest of the world, to one another, is that this is Islam. I don't buy that. Tribal culture is not Islam, but we have made ourselves the problem with Islam.
Miriam Francois Sarai is also here. She is a journalist, a broadcaster, an academic. What do you make of what Dr. Haladian has been saying?
I think part of the problem is that they are going back to those verses. I've just been teaching a course on religious extremism, and the extremists are, generally speaking, politicized individuals who are operating in a framework where the dominant lexicon is Islam. That is the idiom of the society in which they operate. And therefore, in order to make themselves audible to the population, of course they express themselves by reference to Islam.
This is a specialist area. When I have a medical issue, or a legal issue, or a financial issue, I will go to the experts. We're talking about spirituality, we're talking about religion and faith, we're talking about the hereafter. And I wouldn't want to allow lay people to start reinterpreting.
You're dissing the experts. You're doing DIY Islam.
No, spirituality. Spirituality.
Don't misunderstand me.
I do very much understand, and I've heard it over and over and over again. And I remember in Indonesia when this point was made to me, and a scholar, certified scholar, sitting right next to me, said to the person making your point, sir, he said, if you're going to go as far as to compare spirituality to medicine or accounting, well, in medicine, there is a principle called first do no harm. You can actually sue a doctor for doing harm. Maybe we should be able to sue mullahs too for doing harm.
Why are you against expertise specialism?
The Quran, you know, it's interesting because the reason I can embrace the Quran is that, 3 times as many verses in the Quran call on Muslims to think and rethink and analyze, as you've pointed out, rather than submit blindly. So by that criterion, actually all of God's creatures, Muslims especially, are called upon to keep thinking. It's not about expertise. It's about remembering, sir, that you are not God and I am not God. And therefore, none of us can claim to have the, quote, right interpretation.
Would you get rid of all scholars, imams, mullahs, as you call them, anyone, get rid of all of it?
I would help equip a new generation of Muslims with the self-confidence to recognize that they are allowed to think for themselves.
No, we understand thinking for ourselves. I've been thinking for myself for 33 years. I didn't need anyone's permission. I'm asking about specifically coming up with laws, understanding verses of the Quran, understanding traditions of Islam, understanding what, ethics, Islamic ethics are. How can every single person just make that up as they go along? Surely in every religion, in every society, in every field of life, you defer to experts, people with specialist knowledge,
well, again,
which you and I don't have.
Well, wait a minute. As we found out with the 2008 global economic meltdown, which was not predicted by the experts, experts often aren't experts, okay? So let's stop playing the power game, Mehdi. Let's stop playing on the terms of people who call themselves experts and who like to use their power as a cudgel, as a sledgehammer over everybody else.
Who are the people who know, in your view? Who are the people you ask?
Who I ask?
Yeah.
If I'm thinking for myself, but I will tell you,
everything.
Hold on. Certainly.
Everything.
But wait,
you don't need any help in understanding the Quran, the tafsir, the interpretation, the history, the ethics, the context.
One of the most common questions that I get from young Muslims is about interfaith relationships. I'm a Muslim, I've fallen in love with a non-Muslim, is there any hope for us? And they usually say something along the lines of that my parents and their imam insist that Islam, stops interfaith marriage. Is that true? Rather than me giving them my personal interpretation, what I've come to realize is that they're actually not asking about themselves, they're asking about their parents. They need an argument that will convince their parents that love is borderless.
What my worry is, if you buy this argument that the mullahs are all bad, everyone thinks for themselves.
All bad. Come on.
A lot of them are bad.
Hyping that.
A lot of them are bad.
Don't be a typical journalist.
A lot of them are bad.
Don't do that.
A lot of them are bad. I read 2 of your books. They didn't come out very well.
Don't polarize.
A lot of them are bad. We think for ourselves. We don't allow them to monopolize power, end the power game, etc. My worry is, if I'm in Al-Qaeda, that's very appealing. I don't need to worry about classical law, scholarship. I just make up my own religion. I give a fatwa saying, kill the Jews.
And they do. And they do. That's exactly what they are doing.
And aren't you validating them? Because you're saying from a liberal perspective, we make it up as we go along. And they, from an extremist perspective, say, let's make it up as we go along. You're almost empowering the very people you claim to be fighting with.
That's a very... I think that's an excellent point. I've heard it before, and I've said it before. That's an excellent point. Good in theory, wonderful in theory. But again, I live in the world of reality. And the reality is that people like this already exist. And this is why progressive thinkers, and I wish there were more people in positions of religious authority who would take that power and actually democratize the ijtihad, so that young people know that they are worthy of thinking about these issues for themselves, yes, in a non-violent way, but actually developing that personal relationship with Allah rather than believing that they are here to worship Allah's self-appointed ambassadors.
And just to be very clear before we move on, just for the viewers, you talk about ijtihad. How do you define ijtihad?
Ijtihad is Islam's own tradition of independent thinking, of critical reasoning, of debate, dissent, and reinterpretation. And yes, I have heard 1,000 times that only certain people are allowed to exercise ijtihad. But even that is up for debate.
Well, let me just come back to the point you made a moment ago. You said, let's not play the journalism game, let's not generalize.
The
polarization game. It's a very good point. I'm glad you raised that, because I reread both your books and I found myself nodding through a lot of the pages saying, I agree with this. She's right about the way women are treated in a lot of Muslim countries, a lot of Muslim communities. She's right about violence, predilection for violence. She's right about a lot of areas, ignorance, critical thinking, a lot of things. But here's where you and I differ. I read your books and I see only polarization. I see you painting in primary colors. It's all black and white. It's West is great, Muslim world is all backward. They don't think for themselves. They're all automatons, to use your phrase when the program opened.
Well, then I have to say, then you're reading those books from your particular lens.
What do I do with this sentence? One sentence. Under the Arab code of honor, Muslims are taught to abdicate our individuality and accept our fate as the property of our families. Well, all 1.6 billion of us. I don't do that. My parents didn't do that. None of my friends do that. When you say 1 billion Muslims need permission to think, you're not just talking about Arabs.
I'm saying that there is too much fear still among a new generation. When I went to Cairo 5 years ago even, a massive protest against the Mubarak regime, young woman comes up to me and she says, Irshad, I know you get a lot of questions from young Muslims. Here's mine. She said, I have fallen in love with a Jewish man and I don't know how to tell my parents. She said, here I am putting my life on the line to achieve political change in my country of Egypt, but the more frightening thing for me is to speak with my own family about love. Frightening thing.
Why not say some women in Egypt need the permission to think freely? Why say 1 billion Muslims? Why feed into the Islamophobes you mentioned earlier by implying that 1 billion Muslims do not think for themselves?
Again, when you read my point in its context, you understand that I am giving shades of gray and nuance, but of course, like any person who's making a particular argument, you make particular statements in order to drive the point home.
But if you're trying to win over Muslims and reform the community, when you say things like, we have to own up to, quote, Muslim complicity in the Holocaust.
Yes. Yes, as
Muslim complicity.
As there was
Am
Christian.
I complicit in the Holocaust?
I think that anybody who denies that Muslims played a very important role in the Holocaust
A Palestinian mufti,
passive.
I think, is your example.
More than just a
But
Palestinian
what about all the Muslims
mufti.
who died
People
fighting
who
Hitler?
but
What do you do to their memories?
What I do is I write about it in Allah, Liberty and Love. That's what I do.
Agreed. So
okay?
you disown the
and
statement from
that.
your first book that said Muslim complicity?
No, just as I do not disown the notion of Christian complicity in the Holocaust. I'm simply saying that we Muslims,
you break everything down to Muslim.
Muslims have a lot of catching up to do in the dissent department.
One thing we didn't get to talk about, time permitting, is, for example, you hold views that most Muslims don't hold, the vast majority. For example, you believe the Quran is an imperfect book, a flawed book, a contradictory book. Very hard for you to round up Muslims to speak out on that issue because they just don't agree with you.
Sure. Of course there are lots of Muslims who don't agree with me, and Mehdi, there are lots who do, even on this point. But surely you would acknowledge
that there's
that
a big contingent of Muslims who agree with you on the theology.
Surely you would acknowledge that it is far less frightening to speak up in support of the perfect Quran than it is to speak up about contradictions within the Quran.
That wasn't my point. My point was that
but that is the point. That is the point.
My point is on violence. Lots of Muslims agree with you. On the Quran, most don't. Therefore, it's very hard for them to come and share a platform with you when they...
How can you say that most don't when we don't have a world in which it is safe for people to speak up about their real view of the Quran, Muslims included, or Muslims especially? How can you say that most don't?
All right, huge round of applause here for irshdad Manji, who I think gave Mehdi Hasan a run for his money in this debate on Islamic extremism. She is trying to make the case that, and I think she did it very well, stop trying to cover for Islamism. Stop trying to cover for terrorism. Be honest about the fact that there are problems. We need to look ourselves in the mirror. And obviously, typically, as a typical so-called peaceful, moderate Muslim, Mehdi Hasan goes and covers for the Islamists. No. Let's not condemn them. Let's not, try to separate them from Islam because, they're not even connected at all, right? And, she's saying that if you're going to call yourself a religion of peace, you need to reform. You need to make it clear that these are not okay, that this is not okay, etc., etc. And he's like, no, we don't need to reform. We don't need to look ourselves in the mirror at all. And there are videos actually online of Mehdi Hasan clearly making Islamist type statements in his past. And yeah, once he came to the West, he reformed and he tried to blend in, he tried to assimilate. But I really believe that he is still that guy that, made those statements in the past. And maybe he has changed a little bit. But the reality is there are so many Muslims who, even though they don't necessarily hold those extreme beliefs, they'll cover for people that do. They'll say, we don't need to have a reformation process. We don't need to look ourselves in the mirror. We don't need to change. And so to reiterate, this would mostly be good for the Muslim community to reform, to change, to look themselves in the mirror, to take accountability. But no, people like Mehdi Hasan want to drag them back, want to continuously deflect blame and say, no, it's not our fault. We're completely innocent of everything. We don't need to look ourselves in the mirror at all. And it's a big problem. And it's the reason why there are so many Muslim countries today where the children are being indoctrinated into jihadism. The most extremist leaders are getting elected throughout the Middle East. And listen, it's changing somewhat slightly, in Saudi Arabia and Qatar and some of these other countries are trying to modernize. However, they're still funding the Muslim Brotherhood. They're still, in bed with jihadism. It's a problem. It needs to be addressed. And this woman clearly points it out, I think, holds Mehdi to the fire. So, kudos to her for doing that. And voices like her, moderate Muslim voices, need to be elevated while the extremism is pushed down. For more, subscribe to the channel. If you want to help us make more of these videos, you can go to buymeacoffee.com/JewishUncensored. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next one. If you believe in what we do here over at Jewish Uncensored, consider supporting us in a few different ways. You can support us monetarily by going to buymeacoffee.com/JewishUncensored. You can also go to our new merchandise store, IsraelUncensored.com, where we just dropped a bunch of new merch. Additionally, to gain access to exclusive content, you can go to our memberships tab on this channel and join there. And finally, you can share this video with both family and friends in order to share this message with the world. Thank you so much for your support.